point. And is there anything to this kayach of astrology? Is it dvorm b'telim, or is it dvorm sheish b'mamish? Does it have any meaning to it? Or is it just narishkeit? And what is the Torah approach? Can one consult astrologers? Can one believe in astrology? What do Chazal say about this subject? So the makar of this sugya is a sugya in Masechta Shabbos, at the end of Masechta Shabbos on Daf Kuf Nun Vav Amud Aleph. There the Gemara says a number of fascinating things. The Gemara begins by telling us that the day a person is born has something to do with the type of nature that he has. For instance, the Gemara says that a person who's born on Monday will be a ragzon. A person who's born on Monday will be a argumentative person with a bad temper. And the reason for that is, the Gemara says, because on Monday, as we mentioned many times in the shir, machlokes came down to the world because there was the split between the different waters. So a person who's born on a Monday is going to be a person who has an affinity towards argument, to be a ragzan, a person with a temper. The Gemara goes on to say that a person who's born on a Thursday or Wednesday will be wise because the ma'ayros, the light, the heavenly bodies were made then. So what the Gemara is in effect l'chara saying that the day that one is born seems to have a connection with the personality that he'll have. Then the Gemara goes on, and the Gemara says even more fantastic things. And the Gemara says that depending under which star or which planet or which constellation a person is born will have an effect also on the type of person that he is. The Gemara says, Haiman de b'ma'adim, that a person who's born under the influence of the constellation or the planet of Mars, Amar Ravashi iumna iganva itabcha, such a person will either be an uman, a moil, or a surgeon, or a ganif, or a just reading the Gemara, imahula, or he'll be a male. Now what's the shaykhis? Zot the Gemara, because a person who's born under the red planet is going to have shaykhis to blood. So therefore the Gemara says he'll either be a shaykhet, a butcher, he'll be a doctor, a surgeon, a male, or he'll be Rachmana litzlan, he'll take that kayach and he'll go be molastim as habriyas, he'll be a robber, and he'll come into contact, he'll have to kill. So what the Gemara seems to be saying, it's an unbelievable thing, that depending under which constellation a person is born has an effect on his personality. Then the Gemara, after going through a whole list over here of days and stars and planets, the Gemara comes and says, Itma Rabbi Chanina Omar Mazel Machkim Mazel Ma'ashir. That mazel, that depending on the constellations, that what determines whether a person is wise or whether a person is wealthy. Zokt Rav Chanina v'yesh mazel li Yisrael. That these things, all that the Gemara has mentioned, the kayach of the mazolos, of the constellations, of the stars, even applies to Jews. That is Rav Chanina's shita. Then the Gemara brings another Mandi Yamar, Rab Yochanan Amar, Ein Mazel Yisrael. That to Klal Yisrael, who we have a more direct connection with the Ribono Shel Olam, Ein Mazel Yisrael. These things don't apply. Ein Mazel Yisrael. So, b'pashtus, we could dismiss this whole Gemara by merely saying that the Gemara says, at least according to Rabbi Yochanan, Ein Mazel Yisrael, and therefore this doesn't apply to us. But you see from Rashi that that's not what Rabbi Yochanan meant. Because Rashi teaches up, you know what Yesh Mazel Yisrael means, Rashi, in the first Mandi Yomar? V'yesh Mazel Yisrael she'ein tefila utztaka mishana es hamazel. that according to the first Man Yomer, the Jews are subject to mazel. This means, as Rashi learns, that you cannot change it even with davening or with maisim tovim. But Rabbi Yochanan that says ein mazel Yisrael, that doesn't mean that mazel and constellations and astrology doesn't affect Jews. But what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, dal yedei tefila v'schus mishtana mazalo l'tova. Ein mazel Yisrael means yes, we're affected by the constellations, yes, we're affected by astrology, but we can change it by davening, by tefillah, by tzedakah, by maisim tovim. So what both Mandi Yomrim are in effect saying is that that there is a kayach of mazel, there is a kayach of astrology, there is a kayach that determines what type of person you're going to be based on these astrological and planetary implications. Except if you hold yesh mazel Yisrael, ein mazel Yisrael, you can change it. And the Gemara goes on to say, famous Gemara that Hu Adin Rav holds like this. Famous Gemara that the Ribono Shel Olam, the Avram Avinu told the Ribono Shel Olam, and says, I'm unable to have children. Because Zokt Avram told the Ribono Shel Olam, Nistakalti b'itstagnino sheli ve'einu roi l'hoilid ben. I looked up into my astrological forecast, Avram Avinu, and said to the Ribono Shel Olam, and I see I'm not going to have a son. Zokt the Gemara on the pasuk Vayetze Esa Achutza, Zokt the Gemara Amar Lei Tzei me'itstagnino shelcha, that the Ribono Shel Olam told Avram, go out from your astrological predictions, she'ein mazel Yisrael. Now, what does it mean, she'ein mazel Yisrael? It doesn't mean a Jew has nothing to do with mazel, that mazel doesn't affect Jews, constellations doesn't affect Jews. No, so what does the Gemara mean? The Gemara, unbelievable Gemara. My daitech the koi tzadek b'ma'arava. You think you can't have children because Jupiter's position is in the west? And therefore, as Rashi explains, therefore you won't be able to have children. Zakter Ribono, no problem. Mahadranu mukmino le'b'mizrach. I'll change the constellations around and put Jupiter in the east, and you'll be able to have children. It's a mind-boggling Gemara. That the Gemara is saying, in effect, that Avraham Avinu, because of the position of the stars and the planets, wasn't right to have children. The Ribono Shel Olam assured him, don't worry, I can change it. But I have to intervene. And this coincides with what Rashi says, that everybody holds that mazolos and constellations, etc., have an effect on Yid. The Gemara goes on. Gemara marshals a number of maisim, also mind-boggling stories. The Gemara says, Amrilei, the Gemara says over here that Amrilei Kaldoi l'Rabbi Akiva, the Kaldoi. So who are the Kaldoi? So Taisus explains, Bekula Sugya Mashma, Dahainu Chayzim B'Kechavim. The stargazers told Rabbi Akiva, your daughter is going to die. She's going to be bitten by a snake. So the Gemara goes on to say, then when Rabbi Akiva heard that, Havalei Bat, Amalei Kaldoi, Zot the Gemara, Havi Doi Tuva, that Rabbi Akiva was very concerned about this prediction from the stargazers, that his daughter was going to be bitten by a snake. So the Gemara that Selta Gansa Maisa, that Rabbi Akiva's daughter went into the garden, but on that day she was Isaac in a Maisit Staka. So she was miraculously saved, and she wasn't bitten by the snake. And Rabbi Akiva went out and said, "V'tztoka tatzil mimaves," that the only reason she was saved because tztoka tatzil mimaves, because as we said, al yidei tztoka and tefillah maisim tovim, you can be mishana the mazel. But the astrologer's prediction was correct. And finally, one last ma'aseh, the Gemara says, a very famous Gemara that we've spoken out in another occasion, that the Kaldoi, the astrologers, told Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok's mother that your son is going to be a ganef. You hear Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok, the Amira, his mother was told that he's going to be a ganef, not an Amira. So what did she do, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's mother? She came up with a brilliant idea. She gave him a yarmulke. And she said, wear the yarmulke in order that Gemara Shamayim should be on you. And this Rabbi Sai, as we spoke last year, is one of the famous Mekayros of the Indian of wearing a yarmulke. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak wore a yarmulke, and he thought about the Rebbeinu Shalom. This prevented him from becoming a ganef. One day, the Gemara says he was sitting under a date tree or a fig tree, and his yarmulke fell off, and this tree wasn't his, and right away it's an ungechabta taiva to steal some of the dates. As soon as his yarmulke went off, he wanted to steal some of the dates, so now he put on his yarmulke and he didn't. But what do you see? Enoch Hinami, he had a predilection to be a ganef, and the yarmulke saved him. So these Gemaras make quite a case, an impressive case, that there is a kayach to astrology, there is a kayach to stargazers, and this affects Jews at least to the extent that they have to be mispal to get out of it. Not only that, Taisus over here brings a Gemara in Moed Katan, that the Gemara in Moed Katan is even more impressive. Because the Gemara says in the end of Moed Katan that Bani Chayim Mezainis, such basic things as children and Parnasa, is lav bizchusa talya milsa ela b'mazla talya milsa. The Gemara seems to say in Moed Katan that having children or having Parnasa isn't totally in zuchusim at all, it's totally b'mazel, which flies in the face of this Gemara, because this Gemara at least indicates that you can change it with tefillah. So Taisus is forced to say, Mikomakom al yidei schus gadol mishtane. So Taisus says, yes, these things, the number of children and parnasa are determined by mazel, and in order to change it, you need a schus gadol. You need a tremendous merit to change it, even more than stam. So these Gemaras are make a very strong case to suggest that there is a kayach in mazolos, there is a kayach in astrology, and it affects Jews as well. Now, we have to deal with this Gemara on two levels. We have to deal with it on a hashkafic sense, on a philosophical sense. We have to deal with it on a halachic sense. Because this Gemara presents terrible hashkafic problems. Namely, what do you mean that if I'm born under the mazel of Mars, I have a predilection to be a ganef? What does that do to our time-honored yesod of bechira? We know that a person has a free will. He can choose what type of person he's going to be. Is this Gemara telling me that it denies my bechira? Or does it tell me that if I'm born on a Monday, just because I'm born on a Monday, I'm going to have a hot temper? And what do you do? How do you reconcile that with the principle of bechira? So the Meiri in Masechta Shabbos deals with this. And the Meiri says, Mi pinais hadas umi yisaidas ha'amuna, from the fundamentals of Judaism, is lahamin sha'bechira biyad ha'adam b'chol pu'laisav. This is an unshakable tenet of Judaism, that a person has free will to decide what he should do and what he shouldn't do. Zok the Meiri, how do you deal with this Gemara? Zok the Meiri, shekol ze lo yimna habechira mimenu v'lo yiyeh yikra b'zeh muchrach rachayte b'bechira. The Meiri says we must conclude from this Gemara that the Gemara is not saying that my fate is predetermined and predestined. That's a stira to what Judaism is about. What the Gemara merely means over here is that I have a netiya, a proclivity, a predilection to do such a thing, but I can change it if I try. Yes, we're all born with a certain type of personality. We're all different people. But does that mean that necessarily a person who's born under the red planet has to be a ganef? Can't he do something admirable like be a doctor? Yes, he can change. Does it mean that a person who's born on Monday has to be an argumentative type of person? No, it means he's a person with strong convictions, a person perhaps who can be a leader, a person who's not a namby-pamby, a person who's not, placid, a person who, okay, good. So he has his strong feelings, but it's controllable. Zok the Miri, we must say this. Zok the Meiri, Zok the Meiri, that we have to believe that a person can change it. B'kayach tefillah. You cannot say, don't think for a minute that this Gemara is taking away free will from human beings. That's impossible.